I've been playing fantasy football since about 2011, so well over a decade. It's 2024 right now. And there are five huge takeaways that are very important for you to take away from this season when going into your drafts next season. So let's start off at number five, and that is paying big attention to the guys with big workloads, primarily receiving game backs. So out of the top 12 running backs this season, only three of them didn't have 50 plus catches. And those three were Derrick Henry, who is just Derrick Henry. I mean, he's an outlier. He's always going to be an outlier. The other two are James Cook, who had 44, and Kyron Williams, who missed about 6 or 7 games. So he was on pace to get about 45 or so. So he could have hit 50 if he never played, but we all saw how efficient he was. But let's take a look at the rest of the guys. We got Breece Hall, he had 95 targets, almost 100 targets, 76 catches. He finished as the RB2 on the season. You got Bijan Robinson, 86 targets, 58 catches. He was the RB9, and we all know his situation with Arthur Smith. That could be even better next season. I mean, 86 targets, only getting 58 catches out of that. It's still great for fantasy, but that could skyrocket next season. Then you have Alvin Kamara. We all know that he's a big receiving back, 86 targets, 75 catches. He was the RB11 despite missing the first 3 weeks of the regular season. Probably would have had even more. Christian McCaffrey, keep this one short and sweet, 83 targets, 67 catches, RB1 on the season. He's Christian McCaffrey. Rachaad White is really the example I want to use when I'm talking about this workload thing, because he was going as the RB24 on the season, finished as the RB4, 70 targets, 64 catches. Nobody thought he would be good. Nobody thought he'd be efficient. And for the most part, he really wasn't that efficient in the run game. But 64 catches, 70 targets. He was getting that, not that much work, but he got a lot of that pass game work last year. He had nobody in that backfield to take snaps away from him. And that's why he finished as the RB4. So keep him in mind. I'll get back to him in a second, but that is the real example that I'm pulling out here. Rachaad White as the RB24 before the season, knowing the workload that he was going to get, nobody else is competing with him back there. That is what I am taking away from this season. Keep that in mind. You have Travis Etienne, 73 targets, 58 catches. He was the RB3. Jahmyr Gibbs, we saw rookie stardom immediately, or at least week 3 or 4, whenever David Montgomery got hurt. 71 targets, 52 catches. He was the RB10 on the season. And honestly, if he got off to a faster start, which I think we should expect next year, he's going to be even better than that. Would have had more targets and more catches. So Joe Mixon, 64 targets, 52 catches, RB6 on the season. I think that's going unlooked by a lot of people. This was one of my things before the season. I was riding Joe Mixon at, I think he was about RB14 or 13 preseason. And I'm sitting there like, look, guys, he's going to get these dump offs. And obviously, Joe Burrow, Jake Browning, we didn't expect Jake Browning to come in, but he's still, actually, I will say Chase Brown came in towards the end of the season and took some work. But Chase Brown is not really something to worry about. So I'm sitting there before the season like, okay, Joe Mixon, he has all these dump offs every year, 50 plus catches. It's a recipe to be an RB1, and he was undervalued before the season. The other guys that had 50 plus catches were Austin Eckler, Jalen Warren, and Tyjae Spears. So two guys that were battling with another running back in that backfield with Najee Harris and Derrick Henry. Really, Tyjae was just the passing guy there in Tennessee. And Austin Eckler is a big outlier just because of how bad he was this season. And, the whole Chargers offense was just underwhelming, injured, new coaching staff. That's the outlier of this season. But another thing with this workload thing is, like I said, with Rachaad White, you don't even need to be that efficient in order to get these fantasy points in the pass game. So, for example, Rachaad White he averaged 20 touches per game and finished as the RB4, but he was only averaging 3.6 yards per carry. You could say the same thing about Travis Etienne, 3.8 yards per touch or yards per carry, RB3 on the season, 19 touches per game. Some other guys, Joe Mixon, 18 touches per game, 4.0 yards per carry, RB6. Kyron Williams, very efficient. I'm just shouting out Kyron Williams because he deserves a shout out here. 21.6 touches per game, 21.3 fantasy points per game, which is good for the RB2 on the season in terms of points per game. And Derrick Henry, 18 touches per game, 4.2 yards per carry. He was actually the RB8. So like I said, Derrick Henry wasn't one of the ones with 50 plus touches or 50 plus catches that finished as an RB1 on the season. But it's Derrick Henry. He's getting that production in the run game. Some other guys that are looking or getting overlooked a little bit are just some examples I want to use as like stretches towards the end of the season when these guys were getting work. So this is just backing up this takeaway that I have. Chuba Hubbard. So let's see, RB or from weeks 12 to the end of the season, he was averaging 16 touches per game, only 3.7 yards per carry, but over that span, he was the RB11 on the season. Workload, guys. He was not very efficient. Obviously, he was more efficient than Miles Sanders. We won't talk about Miles Sanders, but Isaiah Pacheco in his last 5 games, 20 touches per game, RB3 in terms of points per game. James Conner in his last 4 games, 21.6 touches per game. And in terms of points per game in those 4 weeks, he was the RB1 overall. So again, guys, I will reiterate when you're going through fantasy rankings preseason, and you're going to be able to find these guys ranked as a low in RB2, high in RB3. Once again, Rachaad White, that are going to have these workloads that don't have that much competition, whether they don't have much competition or they're someone like Tyjae Spears who is getting all the pass work. Well, we'll talk about Tyjae Spears in another video, but that dude's going to explode if Henry's gone next year. Make sure that you take advantage of picking out these guys in backfields that are pretty much guaranteed to have that number 1 role with barely any competition. They're just going to get touches left and right all game, 20 touches per game, 18 touches per game. My number 4 takeaway, do not reach on tight ends. Now, this year, you could say it was an outlier, but this is where people lost a lot of their drafts, reaching on Travis Kelce. I did that myself. He took a step back this year. So here are some guys that were taken way too early. Like you had to spend a first-round pick on Travis Kelce, who was valued as the tight end 1, finished as the tight end 3, which Travis Kelce is Travis Kelce. It was very disappointing for him. In the second half of the season, he was the tight end 9, and in the fantasy playoffs, he was the tight end 22. So a lot of his production came in the first half of the season. Definitely overvalued him before the season. Could also say Mark Andrews, but I'll cut him some slack. He was, tight end 2, finished as tight end 15. That's because he was injured. But once again, spending those he was probably a 3rd, 4th round draft pick. That's just gone due to injury. TJ Hawkinson and George Kittle were the only tight ends that were valued inside the top 6 that actually finished in the top 6. You look at Darren Waller. Once again, he was injured, but when he was playing, he was not efficient, not getting targets. He was valued as the tight end 4, finished as the tight end 22 on the season. He was about a 5th or 6th round pick. You have Kyle Pitts, who that was one of my W's this year, and I was not falling for that, especially with Arthur Smith still there. He was valued as the tight end 6, didn't finish as a tight end 1. He was 13th right outside the top 12. Dallas Goedert, another guy that got injured but wasn't that efficient when he was playing, valued as the tight end 7, finished as the tight end 14. These are the guys that are kind of laying around round 7, 8 maybe. Pat Freiermuth was the tight end 8. By the way, these stats are coming from the ESPN rankings before the season that I looked at. Pat Freiermuth was the tight end 8, finished as the tight end 30. Another guy that got injured, but like the pattern that we're seeing here, all these people, you're spending draft picks definitely in your top 8 rounds. And then you get to the people that were not actually, let me say Tyler Higbee, tight end 12, finished as the tight end 24. Another guy that was valued way higher than he should have been. There is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 tight ends here that were severely undervalued that you could have waited so much longer towards the mid to late rounds of your draft to pick up and win you your fantasy league. I think we all know who the number 1 obvious answer is here. Sam Laporta, who finished as the tight end 1, was valued as the tight end 22 on the season. You probably didn't even need to draft Sam Laporta. I think in most leagues, he was a week 1 pickup after he came out and had a great week 1. Evan Engram was valued as the tight end 9, finished as the tight end 2. He was peppered with targets all season. David Njoku, valued as the tight end 10, finished as the tight end 6 overall. Most of that came when Joe Flacco was in. I have my own opinion on David Njoku next year if he has Watson, but we'll get to that in another video. Trey McBride wasn't even valued inside the top 25. Like I said, these ESPN rankings I was looking at only went to 25. He wasn't even in it, and he finished as the tight end 7 on the season. He was the tight end 1 for a good 4 or 5 weeks towards the end of the season there. Cole Kmet was valued as the tight end 13, finished as the tight end 8. Jake Ferguson, another guy that wasn't valued inside the top 25, but finished as a tight end 1, the 9th tight end overall. Dalton Kincaid was tight end 16, finished as the tight end 11. And Taysom Hill, whether you want to call him a tight end or not, he was eligible for a tight end this season, and that's where he pulled out, wasn't valued in the top 25, scored a lot of touchdowns, ended up as a tight end 1 on the season, tight end 12. So if you just take all this information, all those tight ends I just went through, I mean, there's a good 6 or 7 tight ends that you had to draft in the first 8 rounds that didn't pan out for you, and you could have ended up with Dalton Kincaid, Jake Ferguson, Cole Kmet, Trey McBride, Sam Laporta, Taysom Hill, all these guys that very, very late in drafts, and some of them definitely Jake Ferguson, Taysom Hill, Trey McBride, Sam Laporta, you picked them up off the waivers, okay? Which brings me to my next point. Exactly what I just said about tight ends, I'm going to say about quarterbacks, with the exception of Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, and possibly Lamar Jackson. Do not reach on quarterbacks. Do not waste. This is where this is what I said this season. Patrick Mahomes was going at the 2-3 turn, so end of the second round, early third round as the quarterback 1, and he finished as the quarterback 8. And I said that was way too early to take him. You do not need to waste a second or third round pick on a quarterback. And I just said, with the exception of Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, who were going similar, more towards the end of the third round, beginning of the fourth before the season, and they panned out consistent QB1 and QB2 right there. You know, that's okay, but I'll get to my point here, why you don't need to waste those early round draft picks on quarterbacks. But for now, let's go through the rest of the guys that you had to spend early round draft picks on that didn't pan out. Now, I'll just run through the injuries. Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Daniel Jones, Deshaun Watson, Kirk Cousins, Aaron Rodgers. Now, you didn't have to spend early round draft picks on Jones, Cousins, or Rodgers. But Watson was the quarterback 9 before the season. Burrow was the quarterback 5. Justin Herbert was the quarterback 7. These are all guys that were going before round 8, before the season. You don't need to waste that draft pick. Now, obviously, some of them hit, but these guys were going between rounds 4 to 6, depending on your league, whether it was 10-man or 12-man. Justin Fields was valued as the quarterback 6, finished as the quarterback 18. When you factor in the injuries, he was 13th in terms of points per game. But like I said, you don't need to be wasting your 5th-round draft pick on somebody that's QB 13 in terms of points per game. Trevor Lawrence had a bad year, valued as the quarterback 8. You probably had to take him in about the 6th round. He finished as the quarterback 13 on the season. This is just examples of guys that you had to reach on, basically, and it didn't pan out for you. Now, I have 7 quarterbacks here that were valued outside the top 10, with exception of 1 that ended up finishing as a quarterback 1 on the season. So these are the guys that you can just, bolster up your running backs and wide receivers through the first 6, 7, 8 rounds and snag these guys towards the end of your drafts. Jordan Love, valued as the quarterback 22 on the season, finished as the quarterback 5. I don't think many people saw this year for Jordan Love come in, which is why he was valued as the quarterback 22, but there's so many of these quarterbacks that were valued as a low-end QB2, a high-end QB3 that panned out very well for people. Brock Purdy wasn't ranked as a top 25 quarterback before the season, finished as the quarterback 6. CJ Stroud wasn't in the top 25, finished as the quarterback 11. Baker Mayfield, I was definitely wrong on Baker Mayfield. I have to issue my apology video for Baker Mayfield. I wanted nothing to do with him. He finished as the quarterback 10 when he was not valued as a top 25 quarterback. My biggest L on the season was Dak Prescott, but he was valued as a quarterback 10 and finished as the quarterback 3. This is the perfect example. He wasn't taken in the top 8 of drafts. Once you get to around the 10th best quarterback ranking, 10 through 20, 25, whatever, this is when it's not guaranteed that you have to reach. So Dak Prescott was not going in the top 8 rounds, and he ended up being the third best quarterback on the season. Jared Goff was the quarterback 18 before the season. You could have taken him at the end of the draft. I'm pretty sure I picked him up in one of my leagues. He went as the quarterback 7. And this guy didn't pan out as a starter, got benched multiple times, but he was still a quarterback 1 on the season, the 12th best quarterback, Sam Howell, who wasn't valued as a top 25 quarterback. So like I said, Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, full trust in those guys. We'll get to my opinions on them next season in another video. But trust me, wasting a top 5, top 6, top 7 pick on a quarterback when you can just snag the guys that are going to surprise people, that is the way to go. My second biggest takeaway is invest in rookies towards the end of your drafts, or wherever you invest in them, be patient with them. So let's go through a couple of guys that you had to be patient with, but they panned out for you. Jahmyr Gibbs, he was the RB10 on the season. First 6 weeks, he missed a couple of games. He wasn't getting involved. He's a new player. He's a rookie. But from week 7 on, in terms of points per game, he was the RB3 on the season. He was getting traded left and right through the first 6 weeks of the season by people that thought he was going to be a bust. This is why you need to be patient with rookies. RB3 in the second half of the season, that's something you missed out on. Rashee Rice, an even better example. In weeks 1 through 11, he was the wide receiver 42. He was someone you're stashing on your bench, not really hoping, not really expecting all that much from. But from weeks 12 through 17 on the season, he was the wide receiver 4 overall. Huge second half of the season breakout from Rashee Rice. Jaden Reed, a guy who was wide receiver 25 on the season, but in the second half of the season, weeks 10 through 18, was the wide receiver 10 overall. Dalton Kincaid's another guy. For some reason, my stats here got messed up. I'll put them on the screen. I don't know what they are right now. But Dalton Kincaid gave you a great stretch once Dawson Knox got hurt. And when Dawson Knox came back, that second half of the season, that tight end position was Dalton Kincaid's. Some other rookies that were valued right away that you definitely could have gotten off the waiver wire or towards the end of your draft, with exception of Bijan Robinson, who finished as the RB9. Puka Nacua, guys, I have this stat right in my head, doesn't leave my head. He was wide receiver 99 on the season, meaning he was probably drafted in about 0.1% of leagues, of redraft leagues. Wide receiver 5 on the season. Tank Dell was the wide receiver 17 before he got hurt. He gave you right away impact. Sam Laporta, like we just talked about, a guy that you probably got off of waivers, tight end 1 overall. CJ Stroud mostly wasn't drafted, quarterback 11 on the season. And I want to give a shout out to my boy Anthony Richardson, who was going at about the quarterback 16 on the season due to his rushing upside, which is the only reason he was being drafted and Stroud wasn't. Richardson played in 2 full games, and in those 2 full games, he had 21.9 fantasy points, which is his first game, and his 4th start, 29.6 points against the Rams in the big comeback game. And I'm going to throw in the stat of his first quarter that he played against the Texans. He got hurt after the first quarter, but he had 17.7 points in that first quarter, 2 rushing touchdowns. Once again, I'll talk about Anthony Richardson in another video. He's going to be great for fantasy next year, but these are all guys, and let me know who I'm forgetting right now. I know I'm forgetting somebody. These are all guys that you didn't have to spend anything on, whether instead of drafting Zeke Elliott or Odell Beckham or Alan Lazard or some of these older veterans that are at the end of your drafts, just take a chance on a rookie and hope they can pan out like this. And like I said, be patient with them. Do not freak out. Rashee Rice, Jaden Reed, Jahmyr Gibbs didn't have hot starts second half of the season. They won you your fantasy league. Number one takeaway that I had after fantasy football this season, and this has been a takeaway, it's an obvious takeaway, attack your waiver wire. Now, you're probably listening to this being like, well, no shit, I'm going to go pick up guys off of waivers. Take priority in doing research and figuring out which player you need to prioritize every week. And I'm going to list a bunch of players that gave you waiver wire value that if you attacked the waiver wire, these guys won you your league, whether it was for 4 weeks where they were the RB1 and then, their starter came back, or maybe they were Raheem Mostert, who nobody saw coming, but he was the RB5. Devon Achane, RB5 in points per game. Zeke Elliott was the RB7 from weeks 13 through 18. Zach Moss, without Jonathan Taylor, weeks 2 through 6, he was the RB2. He was top 5 in rushing for like the first half of the season until Jonathan Taylor got going. Devin Singletary was the RB15 in weeks 14 through 18. Sam Laporta, tight end 1. Jordan Love, quarterback 5. Kyren Williams, RB7, but RB2 in terms of points per game. Puka Nacua, wide receiver 5. Baker Mayfield, QB 10. Chuba Hubbard had a great end of the year run where he was the running back 11 through the last 4 or 5 weeks, where he was the starter in Carolina. Jaden Reed, already mentioned him. Taysom Hill, tight end 12 on the season. Ty Chandler had 3 weeks there, 3 or 4 weeks where he took over that backfield and won you a few weeks. And, I don't have these stats in front of you, but just some other guys to name is Trey McBride was the tight end 1 for about a 3-week span. Tutu Atwell, weeks 1 through 4, was a fantasy starter for you before Cooper Kupp came back. Jacoby Myers had a great first half of the season, was pretty inconsistent, but gave you some good weeks. Zamir White in the playoffs, guys. This guy was an RB1 in the fantasy playoffs because Josh Jacobs was not playing. I don't know if it was for 2 games or 3 games, but he was in my starting lineup in my fantasy playoffs. We already talked about Rashee Rice. Honestly, Josh Palmer, I don't have his stats in here, but he was in my lineup for a few games towards the beginning of the season when Mike Williams went down. Jake Browning gave you a few good weeks. Joe Flacco was an absolute animal for the span that he played. When Mark Andrews went down, Isaiah Likely came in and absolutely balled out and whooped my ass in fantasy football when I played against him. Gus Edwards, when J.K. Dobbins went down, he had that 3-touchdown week. And I think it was a span of 3 or 4 weeks where he was scoring every week, and he was in your lineup probably as about an RB2. The whole Texans offense, CJ Stroud, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Josh Downs towards the beginning of the season. It was pretty much when Richardson, it was actually the middle of the season. There was definitely a 6-week span or so where he was absolutely needed to be in your lineup. He was scoring. He was getting 8 catches a game, double-digit targets. Dalton Kincaid, we already talked about him. See if I forgot anyone. Jake Ferguson. Now, I don't need to go through and recap every single guy that you picked up for a week or 2 that was of good value for you. But listen, guys, like there are weeks where the waiver wire is ugly, but sometimes those ugly weeks are like Josh Jacobs gets hurt and Zamir White is available, and it's like, oh, he's not going to do anything. And then he's an RB1 for a couple weeks there in the playoffs for you. Like you have to attack the waiver wire. The waiver wire values were absolutely ridiculous this season. Like we saw tight end 1, quarterback 1, wide receiver 1s, running back 1s just from the waiver wire this season. So just a little recap. So before your draft next season, whenever you're doing your research, make sure you go heavy on running backs and wide receivers early, unless value drops to you, of course. Make sure you take advantage of lucking out on some rookies at the end of your drafts. Do some research on rookies, whether it's their Jordan Addison. I'm just realizing I didn't say one thing about him. So shout out to Jordan Addison. I will pop up a graphic for him right here. Give him a shout out. Pay attention to projected workloads, like I said. In season, attack the waiver wire. Be patient with rookies. Whatever rookies you invested in, don't just ship them off for nothing. Like you can trade them, but it better be for good value, not just getting rid of Jahmyr Gibbs for Najee Harris. Like that didn't go well. And then one thing I didn't mention was buy lows and sell highs, but those can be tricky. So thank you guys for watching. This is my first video of Fantasy Fortune. I'm going to be trying to do a video or 2 per week for Dynasty Fantasy Football and Fantasy Football throughout the entire offseason, and we'll be full go once the season starts. Now, we only have the Super Bowl left as I'm posting this, but if you want some free coin on Underdog Fantasy or Sleeper, if you use my code LIPPER, LIPER, on Sleeper, you can get up to $500 match. Now, obviously, you have to deposit $500 if you want that. What most people do is deposit 10 and end up with $20, and they give you hella promos right off the bat. They'll give you Christian McCaffrey to get 1 yard, and then they'll give you 2 other players where they discount Maybe it's Lamar Jackson from 225 passing yards to 158. Like they do that every week. So you only get the half yard when you're a new user, but you'll get those discounts every week for NFL and NBA. So if you like to bet on NBA, go ahead and do that. Underdogs the same way. They give you $100 deposit match. Make sure you use code Lipper on those if you want those free double whatever you deposit. But thank you guys for listening, and